From the sports agents, Mark Pougatch.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Over to you, enjoy.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming along. Glad the weather is good for us all. So for the next 40 minutes, we're going to talk everything F1, what's going on in the world of F1 and in the world of film as well. And I've got two very special guests to help us along with that with our live podcast. First of all, the man who manages the driver at the top of the F1 standings right now, Oscar Piastri, also a former racing driver himself with 9 Formula One Grand Prix wins in his career. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Mark Webber. Thank you very much indeed, Mark. Thank you. And also the CEO of McLaren Racing since 2017. He's led the transformation of McLaren to the team that it is today, the team that is leading the way, Mr. Zak Brown, ladies and gentlemen. Zak, thank you for your time on this lovely sunny day in Trafalgar Square. So, welcome to the Sports Agents podcast. On this show, we interview lots of Formula One drivers. We're at the big season launch, so it's great to have you here. Before we do real life, Mark, let's do celluloid. Let's do Brad Pitt. What have you made of it? It's taken good money to start with. What have you made of it and what it could do for the sport?
Completely, honestly, I haven't watched it yet. But look, he's obviously an iconic actor. Anyone that wants to be involved with our sport at that level is obviously an absolutely huge bonus. We've had Drive to Survive, which has obviously been in the inner sanctum of the sport, which has been a huge success. There's some more of the Top Gun angle, if you like. I mean, the integration of Formula One and Liberty, letting them do the movie within race weekends is just unprecedented, which is extraordinary. No other sport has done that, ever. So that was a huge amount of trust on both sides. So, yeah, it's been a success. I'm hearing the numbers are absolutely extraordinary. Everyone's into it. And a very different, I think, obviously, you know, the demographic, but Netflix have done a great job with, as I say, with Drive to Survive. And that's been happening for a long time now, year after year, finding new ways to get new people to watch our sport and connect with it. This is a different beast altogether with Brad Pitt involved, clearly.
Took 150 million, Zak, on the opening weekend. Does it feel like the next obvious stage after Drive to Survive to try and increase the spread even more of Formula One to get somebody like Brad Pitt involved in this manner?
Yeah, I think, I mean, he's obviously a mega star. It was a first-class production. I think there are some cinematography that we can learn from on how we can even enhance the broadcast of a Formula One race. They showed it to all the drivers and all the team bosses in Monaco this year, so have seen it, and it's high quality. I think they've done an excellent job of capturing what it's like to be inside a Formula One car, inside a Formula One team, and it'll do wonders for our sport, because I think much like Top Gun, which it was the same producer and director, you know, I've never flown a fighter jet, but when you watch that movie, you're like, wow, that's pretty cool. I want to get in a fighter jet. I've since been in a Blue Angels, which was amazing. So I think it'll have that same kind of, you know, I want to try that. I want to follow that. I'm intrigued by that. So it's just another great step forward that Formula One's taken. And they've got some more stuff coming that Stefano shared with us, which is along the lines of furthering Formula One through entertainment vehicles that are quite big. So I think it's just going to help the more growth of the sport.
So the filming was done last season and the season before, wasn't it? What was it like when you went to race weekend and he was there and they were doing some of the filming? How did that work?
He was, in no big great surprise, a total pro. He got to know all the drivers and all the teams, so we spent time with him, and he was a super nice guy. He, I think, has a massive appreciation for Formula One. We put in our Formula One car about a week, 2 weeks ago. He did a very, very good job. So I think he has the utmost respect for the drivers and the sport. So he fit in around us, where I'm sure in Hollywood, they're pretty used to people fitting in around them. And so they were totally professionals, a very nice guy, as was the whole crew. And they were there, as Mark said, you know, on the grid and during the anthems. They had their own garage, and they blended in, and you know, not once over the 2 years did I hear any kind of complaints that they were in the way.
Mark, it says a lot about Formula One as a sport. I mean, obviously he's a major star, but not every sport would that necessarily be so welcoming. There'll be a time they'll be going, actually, you're in the way now. We need to get on and try and do well in this race.
Yeah, but I think Formula One's always been ahead of its time in many ways in terms of the level of professionalism, the way that, you know, the amount of countries the sport's always gone to, how slick the sports run in terms of keep in mind, when you have a Formula One race, there's other categories that race in and around, so the scheduling is absolutely extraordinary, how pulling everything together. So I think that if someone's going to come into that space, you know, Formula One are confident in their model, they know how it works. You've got obviously brutal TV schedules that they have to stick to, but also you've got to be flexible. You know, sometimes there's weather, sometimes there's safety cars, so the sport is very regimented, but also incredibly flexible in terms of understanding how they can have things that might, you know, come into your play that are a little bit more outside of your remit. So for a movie, and as you say, Hollywood, as Zak said, for that to come in to our sport, and it was a beast, obviously. You know, it's a lot of moving parts. They had one take on so many things that they wanted to do. I remember talking to Oscar about it the first time, you know, when Brad Pitt, I think, went to one of the drivers' briefings. He was so keen to impress on them, please, if we get in the way, tell us, you know. So that just was that was
Somebody really wanted to tell Brad Pitt off, didn't
Yeah.
they? You're in my way, Brad.
No, they didn't have to, as Zak said. I don't think there was any complaints. So it was just a really, you know, cohesive operation and done well.
Did you ever see him behind the wheel of any car?
Saw him behind the wheel of a McLaren Formula One car.
Okay.
After Montreal, Oscar went and tested in Austin, as did Lando, and he joined them, and he did a good job. He's a bit bummed that he missed 200 miles an hour by 3 miles an hour, so I wouldn't be surprised if he had another go, but he wanted to look at his data. I sent him his data and his in-car, so he, you know, you've seen other drivers, Patrick Dempsey, Paul Newman. You know, Paul Newman used to say he was a racing driver and a part-time actor, is how much he was in love with racing. So I wouldn't be surprised seeing Brad's level of enthusiasm and exposure if he saw Brad racing some sort of GT car in the future.
Obviously, Mark, Drive to Survive had a massive impact in the US. Do you think that this film makes Formula One go even deeper into that particular market? Is that where the big growth still is in the US, do you sense?
Well, probably. I mean, you know, when I was racing quite a while ago, obviously the US market hadn't really come alive yet. I think that, you know, Bernie Ecclestone did a lot of great things for the sport. The spine of the industry was so incredible, again, before our time, compared to lots of other global sports in some ways. But ultimately, you know, with Liberty coming in, the digitalization of the sport, these little things that we have now called phones. So, you know, everyone is understanding the sport, you know, a lot more in depth, and that having the races in the US, obviously Austin race was there for a while, but it didn't have the love that it does today. And then obviously you got Miami now and Vegas, and so that appetite for it. So I think that, yeah, I think that I've had a lot of people message me from the US talking about the movie. They're keen to watch it. They're keen to understand it. And it's another lane that's opened up for people to see, I suppose, as Zak said, the cinematic approach to the sport, the intensity, the passion that goes on, where, you know, Drive to Survive is a bit more, you know, sitting in the background and grabbing the stories in a way like that.
What do you think, Zak? Is it the US still where the big growth is, potentially?
I think there's a lot of growth everywhere. I mean, if you look at the calendar, obviously Europe is the base of Formula One, always has been, always will be. Now in America is 3 Grand Prix in the States, Montreal, Mexico, Brazil. So I think in Americas, we're super strong. I think there's a lot of room for television growth. If you can look at the NFL and the NBA and the TV ratings they do compared to Formula One, a lot of growth, which is exciting. And then I think Asia Pac, you know, India, Korea, second race in China. If you think about, it took 3 races to get really big in North America. You know, if you look at Asia Pac, we don't probably have enough races there to have that same level of impact. That being said, 24 races is the max we can do. So I'm a fan of doing maybe 20 permanent races, 8 races that rotate every other year. So that's a way to get calendar growth without racing more than 24 times a year. Because I can tell you all the men and women, the drivers are worn out after 24 races. They're worn out after about 22 races, but they power through. So we can't race 28 times a year. I'd like it, but I'm in the minority in that sense. And but a lot of room for growth. I think we're far from peaking.
Mark, just one more on this, then we'll talk about what's going on this season with McLaren, obviously, with the drivers. I think you mentioned it, I think you used the word entertainment a little bit earlier. Is there growth with the recognition now that Formula One has a big entertainment pull. I mean, a lot of sport is just sport. We're going to win, we're going to lose, we're not. How much is Formula One aware of the entertainment angle and the importance of playing on that angle as much as the competitive nature of it?
Sure. I mean, there's obviously, that's why all these fans, love the sport, because there's still an element of jeopardy, obviously. You see that with lots of sports. You don't really know who's going to win, of course. So you've got the component of turning up and seeing there's going to be a competition. But also I think the gladiatorial component is big. I think that's a very attractive thing for Formula One, that we still see people or the drivers doing speeds that, there's a lot of people that drive road cars and they can look at a sport when you can see it and go, okay, this is something that, I cannot imagine even trying to contemplate myself doing with the speeds they have. So I think that gladiatorial component, the risk component, has had a huge cut through, even on Drive to Survive, for example, because I think that they like to see that. I'm a huge sports fan. I love tennis. I love golf. I watch lots of other sports. But I say to my tennis buddies, of course, you can only pull a hamstring. You can only do, so in terms of the risk appetite is a bit different. So I think that entertainment side of watching the sports, TV-wise, the sport's got a lot better to have people understand the sport. What are they watching? It's a highly technical sport. It's easy for people to be confused. Our job is not to do that. We're trying to make the sport with the aerodynamics, with the DRS, with the tyres. There's lots of things in there that isn't for everyone. So to try and hit the sweet spot of actually educating the people, not in a condescending way, patronising way, get them into the sport so they can understand this is actually bloody entertaining to watch. I'm really enjoying this week in, week out, and not getting confused as well, which is a fine line.
Absolutely is a fine line. So let's talk about McLaren, the great success since you took over. And last year you won your first Constructors' Championship in 26 years. How much did you have to convince everybody last season, psychologically, you being the leader, that you could get over that hurdle? Because it doesn't matter what the sport is, the longer you don't win something, everyone goes, well, can they do it? Do they, everyone uses that B word, don't they? Are they going to bottle it again? Do they believe they can do it? What was your part in all that?
I don't think we had Constructors' Championship in mind last year. I think Lando had gone a long time with not having won a race, so I think it was kind of like it'd be great if we could get Lando his first win. Be great if we can get Oscar his first win, and we'd like to finish top 3 in the championship. I think that's kind of where we entered the season. Even then, after we won in Miami, it was like, all right, we've got that win. Now when are we going to get our next one? For me, it wasn't really till mid-season that I thought, we got a shot here. Pete Padromo, our head of Aero, he called it early on. He went into the season going, there's no reason why we can't fight for the championship. I thought that was a bit optimistic. So it really wasn't until mid-year where we really hit a groove that we thought, game on. But we went into Miami this year the same amount of points ahead of Red Bull that we were behind them last year, and that we ended up winning. They finished 3rd, so even though we were winning in Miami and they finished 3rd, there's a long way to go in the season. We see how quickly the sport can change. We're not even to the halfway mark. So while I think the Drivers' Championship has 5 drivers in it, in my opinion, 2 of which are ours, but Max is not far behind. George is right behind him, and I don't think Leclerc's out of the game. Hopefully in a few more races, that 5 will become 4 and 3. And, for us, a dream scenario would be Oscar and Lando going into Abu Dhabi, and may the best man win.
So are you saying that we in the media make more of the Constructors' Championship than necessarily you are within the teams?
No, for us, they're both equally as important. People ask us, do you prioritize one or the other? But if you can finish 1st and 2nd in the Drivers' Championship, you're going to win the Constructors. So we want to finish 1st and 2nd in the Drivers' Championship. We want Oscar and Lando to decide the order. That's between them. Our goal is to give them equal equipment, equal opportunity, and let them race it out, which is exactly what's happened all year long. I think we saw an epic battle in Austria. It was awesome to see. They raced each other hard. They raced each other clean. And it was nose to tail all race. And I think we're going to see more of that. In Montreal, we had that incident that we knew was going to come. We've always been saying that was a matter of when, not if. I'm kind of happy the way it played out because it was one driver's mistake. He put up his hand right away. Fortunately, it didn't hurt Oscar's race. Fortunately, it wasn't for the lead. Fortunately, it wasn't a turn 1. They're both wiped out, and you're arguing the following week over whose fault it was. So in that sense, Lando owned it. Oscar understood mistakes happen, so it was a non-event. But there's going to be more of it. You're not going to put two racing drivers next to each other in the same team or not, race as hard as they're racing and not have incidents. So it's all about trust, teamwork, communication, and we couldn't have a better driver lineup. I've been saying that from day one.
You absolutely have. So you're saying at the moment that they both have equal priority, as it were. They're racing, as things stand, mano a mano, may the best man win.
100%.
Okay, as the manager of Oscar, how do you feel when you hear that, Mark?
Well, it's great to hear. I mean, you can see right at this point, they've both been driving brilliantly. Obviously, Oscar's came out of the gates this year pretty strong, to say the least. Obviously, having led the most laps, most wins, most poles. So that's a feather in his cap, but obviously you need the equipment to do that, and that's what McLaren have provided him with. You know, and then when you've got someone like Zak, who's, you know, commercially bringing the partners into the team, so that's super exciting for the team. They've come a long way from you know, the last few years where it was a challenging phase, and that's what happens in sport, football clubs, you know, whatever side of the Atlantic, and Formula One as well. There's a bit of ebbing and flowing, but just the inertia behind the team now, the drivers know that as well. You know, it's very challenging to put yourself in this situation, and as Zak said, you know, the complacency just cannot set in at all. You know, it's the margins are so tight. But of course, you know, Oscar's incredibly proud of how he's been driving up to this point, and there's a long way to go in the season. I think there's going to be some tremendous racing between the pair of them. Max is still there. You know, we've got some weather around the weekend, some rain potentially. So, like, that's just literally the cat amongst. There's a lot of pigeons here in Trafalgar Square, so that will put the cat amongst the pigeons. And so, long way to go, and they're both driving brilliantly. And yeah, as Zak said, it's up to them to sort out who's going to lift the big trophy.
Give us a little bit of an insight, if you would, into Oscar's character. What is he like?
Well, he's, I think, pretty hard to read for people on the outside. Obviously, he's incredibly calm. I think we can see that component, but I think that I think people shouldn't confuse that calmness with him not having big dreams and big desires. And he's a very big competitor. You know, I think when the helmet goes on, there's lots of people in sport where we talk about that white line fever, where you've got this little, you know, gentle teddy bear. Not that Oscar's the teddy bear, but there's some sports people that just cross that white line and they turn into someone different. I think Oscar has a lot of belief in himself. That's important. He always has done. Obviously, he had an exceptional junior career, winning lots of championships, and now arrived in Formula One, even winning quite early in his career, which was, you know, he's got to do that with his people, you know, and get the engineers to believe in the journey that he's taken them on as well, which is really, really positive to see that. So ultimately, he's, you know, he's not one for the limelight, let's say. I think he's very, you know, he's not shy. He just wants to race, and he loves racing, competing, and of course, he loves representing McLaren week in, week out. That's been obvious from the off. So yeah, he's Australian, loves representing Australia, of course. You know, there's going to be some hopefully a few Aussie fans out there this weekend too. Of course, it'll be overwhelmingly British. But I think when I raced here, this was my second home race. I always had a tremendous reception from the British fans. Of course, they wanted Jensen and Lewis to win when I was racing. But when they couldn't win, they normally fell to the other, you know, Commonwealth driver, I suppose. So Oscar hopefully can have a good weekend in Silverstone as well.
Well, I've been lucky enough to be in Australia quite a few times for sporting way. I can imagine how they're getting behind him down there. Because, you know, a sportsman or woman doing well in Australia is a big deal. Yeah, absolutely. And I think also in individual sports, that's another layer when you're doing something individually. You know, whether, you know, we had, of course, Greg Norman, we had Paddy Rafter, Leighton Hewitt in tennis, you know, myself and Daniel or whatever. So you see that it's a long way to come from Australia to succeed overseas. I think that the European drivers, in some ways, it is actually easier Monday to Friday to have your loved ones and your family around you, particularly early in your career. We don't have that luxury, you know, and that's not an excuse. It's just the way it is. Geographically, it's another test that you have to, you know, line yourself up for. So there's been a lot of, you know, it's a great saying. It's a long way to come and go home with your tail between your legs, you know. So you want to make sure it counts. You know, you can't just go around the corner and go home and have dinner with mum because she's not here. So you want to really make your presence felt. And, you know, that's something that Australia now, again, fully behind Oscar. The event this year was extraordinary. And, yeah, we've got good plans for the event next year with Oscar. So who knows if he's there, in what capacity, if he's managed to do something really extraordinary this year. But the fans have been awesome. Zach, give us an appreciation of Oscar and his character as a team principal at McLaren.
First of all, he's awesome. And he's, what you see is what you get. He just kind of gets on with it. I think he's got unbelievable talent, and then he's got huge passion in the race car, but no emotion. And I always say, there's a fine line between emotion and passion, but, emotion's not a good state to be in a race car, and he has none of that. In the race car, outside the race car, he's very, very technical. He's very kind of fact-based, and he gets on with it. And he's, the part that I've started to see as I gotten to know him better, he's very witty. He's a funny guy, so as Mark said, he's not shy. He just kind of gets on with it, and he's just very focused on racing. Another guy that I've been around a lot that's very similar, and that is Fernando Alonso. And if you think about his age relative to competing in Formula One, the reason he's had such a long, great career is it's just all he does. He's just racing, 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 and that's all that's on Oscar's mind. And if you look at the areas that he needed to improve upon in his third year, he's killed it, right? It was qualifying last year, put yourself in a better position for the start of the race. And his qualifying's been amazing. His Fridays have been amazing. He never makes mistakes. He's not flustered. We've had to revise our coaching to him. When he started, it was like, listen to your manager. He's won 9 more Grand Prix than you. And then they started, listen to your manager. He's won 7 more Grand Prix than you. And then, soon he's going to be like, well, I've now won more Grand Prix than Mark. Now what?
That's not in question. That's not in question. The least he listens to me, the better. But yeah, absolutely. No, it's extraordinary to have that many victories so far, obviously in his career. And I think we can all agree that obviously he's going to have a solid career. But how extraordinary that's in Oscar's hands. But yeah, no, he does his talking on the track. He doesn't do his talking, in terms of he really is analytical about obviously what he talks about and how he goes. Say what you want, mate, but you got to back it up on track. And he really is, and I think that with the people in his corner as well, in terms of, with his engineers and the people and the team, it's like, just, I would like this, I'd like that. Okay, you got that? Bang, goes out and does it. So he's, yeah, it's quite cool to watch from the outside.
But in terms of being quite quiet off the track, that will come, won't it, as he matures, as he gets older? So that's nothing that you have to fast forward. Naturally,
any elite sports person in any sport, you can't, obviously, look at someone like Daniel. His brand was so big. Daniel was a big brand, and in conjunction with McLaren, who did a great job with, and they do a great job with branding. Obviously, clearly they're awesome at that. And then you have, someone like Daniel in the sport who's massive. And then obviously you have Oscar, who's just starting his career, as did Lewis, as did Fernando, as Zak touched, as did Daniel, as did all these bigger brands. They've got to start somewhere. And you can't just parachute into that same point where, where the other very experienced campaigners have gone on that journey in their career. So someone like Roger Federer, classic case, 2 years in compared to at the end of his career, it's a different. It's
called growing up, isn't
it? Different conversation. Yeah.
What does he like to do off the track? I mean, I take the point, as Zach said, he likes to race. But is there a way that he relaxes? Is there something he likes to do? He's
pretty horizontal. Yeah, he's pretty horizontal. Likes his sim. He has a bit of, I think he mucks around on the sim a little bit. Yeah, he's likes his sport. He likes watching sport. He definitely is into that. Watches basketball in the US and loves his Australian rules footy and loves his cricket. So he'll be watching, obviously, the next few months. Zach hates cricket. Absolutely hates it.
Haven't got that far yet.
Yeah, so not hates it, but he's like, how can this is so boring?
I just don't understand.
He doesn't understand. 5 days, how's that possible?
It's a better version of baseball, Zach. That's what it is.
No, please don't compare it to baseball. That's a proper sport.
Yeah, Oscar loves his sport. He really does watch his sport. He's a bit of a, he really enjoys that. But I think now people have got to understand their scheduling as well. Like, he's just having the downtime to actually have a bit of a pit stop. So again, that's something that he's learning, what he likes to do, what he doesn't like to do. Most things that Oscar picks up, whether it's new sports, whatever he does, frustratingly, he's pretty handy at most things, like most of these guys are. So you put him on a cycle bike, you do this, like, yeah, mate, you look technically pretty slick on that. Oh, okay, no worries. Okay, yeah. So he can pick things up pretty quick.
So how does his characteristics and personality compare with Lando then? Because you're in this remarkable position where the two of them are neck and neck going for the title.
It's great. They're very complementary. They're similar in many ways and also not. But I think, you wouldn't want 2 Zaks in a team or 2 Marks in a team or 2 Oscars in a team. I think actually having them be complementary and different personalities brings out the best in both of them. They learn from each other a lot, so I think that's been great for them individually and the team. Obviously, Lando's been in the sport longer, so he's got kind of a head start in that sense. And Lando is just a different personality, a bit more extroverted. He wasn't always like that, Lando. He also too was quiet, so you see how much he's grown over the years. They have a tremendous amount of respect for each other, and you can tell when you have drivers around each other if there's some tension in the air, and there isn't any. And that's not to be mistaken for they both want to beat each other really bad, because when you come in, the first thing you do is you look at where your teammate is. That's just inevitable in any form of motorsport. But they've got a huge amount of respect for each other, and you can see that when they're together. In debriefs, there's not, you used to, in the good old days, be, I'm flat through that corner, and then you find out you're not because the driver's they don't do any of that stuff. I think they realize the best chance they have to win is to try and separate both of them from the competition, and then they've got one guy to beat each other versus 19. So they're working well together, and that's why we've got them both signed up long term, and with all this driver drama that's going on, we can just sit back and watch the movie like everybody else.
Mark, you've been in this business a long time in many different parts of this business. How unusual is this situation, though, where there are not at the moment team orders, where there's not clearly a number one and a number two? Because you would have seen it so many times. The number two goes, I had to pull over and let the number one go through.
Yeah.
How unusual is this?
I mean, it's happened before. I mean, you had it with Nico and Lewis, and obviously, back in the day with McLaren drivers. So there has been a natural blending of someone that just can't keep up with a fight, obviously, so then you have this natural inertia where the other driver can't go deep into the season. When that's not the case, this is the scenario you find yourself in. You've got two actually can go, they're competitive on all circuits, obviously give an equal opportunity to do the business, then obviously can go deeper into the season. So I think it doesn't happen all the time, clearly, but it has happened, and it clearly it takes some management from the team to understand how that, it's just equal and fair, and that as long as the two boys know they're getting a fair crack at it, that's all you can do. That's the most important thing that they can do there. And ultimately, it'll be won and lost. We don't know when it's going to be won and lost, or like Zak said, there's other people still at the party at the moment. So you can never discount that, particularly someone of Max Verstappen's caliber. So. Great for the fans. I think the race in Austria was, like Zak touched on, they've got a race. To race soft is like, it's weird because, when you've got someone in front of you, he's braking on the limit. He's just braking on the limit. So you have to try and outbrake him. It's all, you've got to be doing something that's pretty tricky to do. Obviously, you saw like Oscar with Charles Leclerc at Azerbaijan last year. That was a pretty unbelievable move, and that can happen. That's that hard racing, yes it is. So you've got to find the sweet spot between both of them, and they're working that out right now. Week in, week out. Obviously, we've had Lando own Canada, fine, but like I think for the fans and for the teams, or for this team, obviously, I think it's good that they can let them crack on, and it's not always going to be like that because you're going to have other people in. I think they've only raced each other twice, and we've done 12 races, so it shows you that it won't always even happen on track like that.
Well, just to fill everybody in, I'm sure everyone knows, but those listening might not. Piastri 15 points ahead of Norris now, who's 46 ahead of Verstappen. They're racing each other fairly now. Is there a situation later in the season when A is clearly ahead of B, where team orders might come into things? Is that just a practical reality?
Yeah, if. I don't think it's going to end up being that way, because it even wasn't last year when we asked Oscar at the very end of the season to support Lando. That was a tough decision because Oscar was never out of the game. And so someone's going to have to be out of the game for us to make that decision. It's not what we want. We want to see them both race, for it all the way through Abu Dhabi. But if there does become a point where it makes sense and the drivers agree, and that's what we had last year. What was great is last year Oscar helped Lando in Brazil, and then Lando repaid the favor in Qatar. So they're very aware of what's in the best interest of the team and, of course, themselves. And we're very aware of that. So we were pretty uncomfortable last year when we all kind of got around, hey, if Lando's going to have any chance, can we help? Fortunately, it was only a couple races. And the ironic thing is we made that decision in Baku, and then Oscar goes out and wins Baku, which just shows you why, like, we really need someone to be mathematically out of it. And with how things are going, I don't see that being the case.
So Oscar's quite happy with that. You've had conversations about that. There might be times you have to support Lando if that's the reality of his trying to win the title because you can't.
Oh, I don't see that happening this year.
But one day down the line, he knows that, you know, or
it's
I suppose my question is, any driver knows that within
But
the team.
both drivers know that.
Yeah.
Both drivers know if one driver gets to a point where they're mathematically ahead, whether it's Lando or Oscar, they'll become reluctantly but professionally support the other. But as Mark said, I definitely don't see that happening, and it barely happened last year. And we weren't very comfortable with it, but everyone was aligned around it, and it was only for a short period.
Let's talk about Silverstone this weekend, because Lando said that he'd got a little bit of an inkling of what it was like to be Harry Kane going into a major championship and all the pressure that was on, obviously, the England football team that is on him. How is he responding to that level of expectation, do you think?
I think anytime you have a home race, of course, it's a little extra special. No different than when, you know, we landed at the first race of the year in Australia and all you saw was Oscar everywhere, which is awesome. So Oscar had as many cheers here yesterday as Lando, which is awesome because I think, you know, Oscar loves Silverstone as well. He goes very well around here. But I think anytime you're in a home race, you know, it's the same for me when we go to the U.S., you know, I kind of want to win Austin or Miami or Vegas, maybe a little bit more than another Grand Prix, because for me it feels like a home Grand Prix. But I think both our boys are going to be right at the sharp end of the field. It's a circuit our car's good at. Oscar should have won this race last year. Unfortunately, we made some mistakes because he was gone. And we just made some errors there. But, you know, we learned from those, and so we're a smarter team today than we were yesterday, and that's all you can do. Mistakes happen, and I always say around the factory, just don't make the same mistake twice. But we should have won this race last year. Oscar was a mile ahead of everyone, and the conditions were tricky, so you can make mistakes. It was a tricky situation, but we'll give it another go this year.
Mark, what makes Silverstone what it is?
Oh, it's a magnificent circuit. Absolutely magnificent track. It's fast. It rewards the brave. You know, you've got to be on top of your car. Technically, you've got to really put it up on its tippy toes. And you think that you're on the limit, and then there's always a little bit more there. Zak's a racer too. He knows what that middle sector looks like. Copse, Maggots, Beckett's down to Stowe, which I believe Lando's got a corner at this year. So that'll be awesome to see the car swing into there. But also the fans. I think for me, when I was, you know, again, like even as a young boy, I remember watching, you know, Mansell and Piquet, you know, race here and all those years ago back on my TV in Australia. So the British fans have always supported the British Grand Prix, you know, every single year. And there was a few years, obviously Donington, 93, right? So big crowds there. So wherever the race has been, Brands Hatch before that, it's such a knowledgeable crowd. The industry's here. There's so many amazing legends that have been, you know, that have competed here. All the legends have raced in the UK. So, and it's stable on the calendar. You have to have a British Grand Prix, in my opinion. It's such a, you know, it's the rock bed of our sport. Or a lot of the teams are based here. The fans are absolutely extraordinary. And then what blows me away, I've had a lot of Aussie fans come over to this race, and when the weather is absolutely shocking, they still turn up. It's like the Australians are a bit soft with the weather. It's like, oh, I might watch it on TV today, mate. And it's like, these guys, they are the best in the world. Whether rain, hail or shine, they will go. So I always take my hat off to how loyal the fans are to our sport, which is awesome to watch.
Yeah, Silverstone or Glastonbury, doesn't matter. The weather bad, they're still there. You just mentioned it there. So talk about what's happening at Stowe Corner, Lando's stand. Tell everybody what that is and where the impetus came from for that.
Yeah, I'm not sure where it started from in Lando's world, but there'll be a stand that's all Landoed out, which is very, very cool, and I think gives drivers a little bit of a little extra energy. You always find that little half a tenth because you're at your home race, so the cheers are a little bit louder. So we're excited. It's a home race for us. We haven't won this race since 2008. Last time with Lewis. It's an iconic Grand Prix for me. Silverstone, COTA, Australia. They get the biggest sets of fans and very, very knowledgeable, as Mark said. 400,000 or 500,000 people over the course of the weekend, and that brings a lot of energy to everybody when you see the size of the show that we put on.
It was interesting that Jenson Button admitted, he told us how gutted he was he'd never been on the podium, even though he won a world title. So you know, from all the British drivers you drove against, and obviously lots of them won it, but how desperately they wanted to do at Silverstone.
Absolutely, and Jensen and I joked about it for our whole careers because he wasn't lucky enough to get a good result in Silverstone, never on the podium, but he won the Australian Grand Prix twice, which really pissed me off. So I won this race twice, and I was never on the podium in Australia. So, mate, if we could have traded one of our wins either way. So for me not to have a good result in Australia was frustrating, and JB was another one here. He just it never really clicked for him. But I remember Lewis's, the last McLaren win here in 2008. That was an extraordinary one of Lewis's. I mean, obviously he's won a few races, over 100, but that was one of his best drives ever. So. Yeah, of course, I want to win it. George is going to be competitive. Lewis, who knows? Last year, Lewis, it was a great result for him too here with mixed conditions. So, there were a lot of Union Jacks out there, and even of course, as an Australian, you can't help but admire the intensity that the fans bring and the energy the race has. It's second to none, really. It's impressive.
Well, particularly because it's celebrating 75 years of Formula One racing this year. And actually, if people look at all the newspapers online, there's some fabulous old photographs, aren't there? I think there were 4 cars in the first race or whatever. What is I think you mentioned it, would 87 be your best memory that you didn't drive in, the famous Mansell duel? Would that be it?
Probably, yeah. That was down to actually where Lando's got down to Stowe. They had a big fight down into that corner. But I always used to love watching Alain Prost race because waking up at 2 a.m. in the morning in Australia, I used to go to bed. My dad used to wake me back up because it was obviously, getting ready for school the next day, Monday. And because Mum was in charge of getting me to school, which was always a bad job to have. Dad had gone to work, but he'd wake me up at 2 a.m. And I'm like, I want to follow Alain Prost because his chances of finishing races was very, very high. I didn't want to follow a driver that would always be out early. So it's like Dad said, you've got to go to bed when your favourite driver's here. So Prost, my man, because I love watching Alain race. So, so lots of memories of, a lot of McLaren success at Silverstone through that era. But also I think when Senna got a lift back with Nigel, I think the Mansell Mania, for me as a youngster too, watching that was unbelievable, track invasions and all the rest of it, which of course won't happen, these days. But seeing those track invasions again, that just shows you what the sport meant to the people and what Nigel meant to the British fans as a world champion. And that was obviously off the charts as well. From a young boy watching in Australia, I love watching that.
There's a photograph of him giving a lift in the paper. I mean, you have to look at it twice to go, oh yeah, there are 2 people actually. There's one on the cockpit. What would your memories be of Silverstone growing up? I mean, you raced a lot yourself, but what would it mean to you growing up?
I mean, it's amazing. It's to me, it's kind of Monaco level type of excitement. I think the '87 Nigel race, I actually have that car and I'm driving it this weekend in Silverstone. So maybe a bit weird. I'm in a Williams, but we're doing they've got some historic Formula One cars going out. I was always a Nigel Mansell fan. The other one would probably be 2001 when Mika made an awesome pass on Schumi around the outside going into the Maggots-Beckett's complex. I was a massive Mika Hakkinen fan, still am. So it's pretty cool that he's here joining us this weekend and here today. Of course, that's Senna, Mansell. I remember Mark's big win when he had a car that wasn't of the same recent updates as his competitor and had an awesome race. I remember that race. I was at that race, the Lewis race in '08. I mean, I think the British Grand Prix put together a lot, but if I had to pick one, because it would be the '87, because first of all, I'm still a fan to this day. Some of my other team bosses somehow think that's a weakness. I think that's a positive and a benefit, because I remember the first Grand Prix I went to, the impression it made on me. So I feel part of my responsibility at McLaren is to make sure that all of our great fans have access to our team. And I hope that everyone takes that same memory from today or whenever you're at the race, when you meet Oscar, you meet Lando, you see a car, and then 20, 30 years from now, it's like, I remember when I was in Trafalgar Square and I met Oscar, I met Lando, or whatever the case may be, because I remember 81 Long Beach Grand Prix like it was yesterday. I still have the race program. First racing driver I met was Eddie Cheever. I got his autograph. I just remember it like it was yesterday. And so I know the impression, because we all are here because we love sport, we love Formula One, and so we want you to be able to get as close to it as possible. And it can be challenging when you've got big groups and hundreds of millions of people, but fortunately in today's digital age, it allows us to do some things that I couldn't do when I was growing up. Now you have the ability to engage with Oscar and Lando that I couldn't engage with Ayrton Senna or Nigel Mansell back then. I had no mechanisms to do that.
We just got a couple of minutes to go, so I've got a couple more questions for you. Mark, obviously, as I say, you manage Oscar, but if you could say something to Lando about a British driver embracing the expectation of a home Grand Prix, what would it be?
Follow your teammate home. That'd be good.
Because it's a different sort of pressure, as you said. It's completely different.
Well, it's just weird. Yeah, it's I think it's the build-up. I think it's the expectation that people. I think that everyone wants it so bad for you as well. Like who are you ultimately doing it for? That's the thing. Like there's 23 other races, which probably for Lando, of course, don't have. He won Monaco this year, which was an extraordinary performance. That's a big box ticked. Home Grand Prix is a big one, of course, and Zak mentioned some of the other classic circuits. So there is some, if you want to cherry pick some races, of course, that you'd like to win as a Grand Prix driver, they're certainly there. They're the historic events, and your home Grand Prix is certainly up there. So, I think that you can't press the throttle any harder. You can't, try and reinvent the wheel because it's your home race. Of course, he's a high caliber driver. He knows what he needs to do. But ultimately, it's going to be down to the key decisions. It's always down to, there could be 1 or 2 seconds on the weekend where you've got to make the right decisions. And that's, as we saw Zak touched on last year, there was some, and that's the great thing about F1. You've got to make decisions, load the dice in your favour all the time to make the right one as often as possible. You do a lot more losing in the sport than winning. That's just how it is. It's a nasty beast like that. Lando's, he's never had more experience than today. So he's just got to lean on that and go out there and do the best job for his team.
Zak, let me just ask you one, if I may, about talking about great drivers and maybe people on the move. What was your reaction? I think you've talked about this week, about Max Verstappen maybe moving on.
Well, I'm a general believer of where there's smoke, there's fire. No one's kind of denying anything. If you said to Oscar and Lando or me, who's in the car at McLaren next year, it's 110% Lando and Oscar, and we all say it. So when you get into we've got a contract through 28, but yet no one's definitively saying, no, that's where I'm going to be. There's conversations clearly going on. I think Mercedes is a team on the rise. Red Bull at the moment has challenges. Doesn't mean that they can't fix those challenges, but Max in a Mercedes is pretty uncomfortable to think about because he's awesome and they're awesome and on the rise. So I think I'd rather him stay where he is. I think it would be a disaster for Red Bull if they lost Max, because if you look at how that's all going, you could almost question whether the AlphaTauri is a quicker car and Max is that special. So it's the fascinating part about Formula One. I'm glad we're able to watch and not participate in that, because it'd have to be an uncomfortable position for Red Bull management to be in, that their superstar driver, one of the best racing drivers in the world ever, who's clearly kind of carrying that car at the moment, could leave, and then what? And then, but I think that's one of the things Netflix has done a great job is, unlike other sports where it's exclusively about the field of play, our field of play, there's a lot going on off the track, and I think that's one of the things that Netflix done, is shown how complex, political, drama, whatever you want to call it, our sport has. So there's a lot of different reasons why people love Formula One. Of course, we all love the competition on track. That's first and foremost. But then you like the drivers, you like the technology, you like the politics. It's big business, where most other sports, you're not really too interested what's going on in the in the back office, so to speak. So it's fascinating times. I think we're going to know here shortly. The one thing I've learned with Formula One is expect the unexpected. So there could be something going on that none of us even know about.
Mark, I just want to finish with this, and there's a reason for my asking you about safety. Formula One has done so much in the last 10, 15 years about the safety of the drivers, and it's extraordinary. But today's terrible news about Diego Jota, I think, makes us realize all the fragility of life, the inherent dangers involved with cars. I suppose my question is, Formula One will never, ever be complacent again, will it? And it'll always keep pushing the boundaries of safety for its drivers.
Of course. I mean, the sport's gone on a tremendous journey to make the cars safer. From Sir Jackie Stewart really pioneering the way on making the cars safer, that we can still race, we can still do things that people can look up to and aspire to say the cars aren't slow, because then maybe that's not as attractive to watch. Of course, we still want the cars to be something that people are really aspiring to look at and watch. That's an extraordinary experience to watch. The tracks are getting safer. There's certainly been a big step on circuits being safer. And I think motorsport in general has been responsible for so much road safety in general. Traction control, tyre technology, mapping of engines, throttles, predictability. All these things comes from our industry, comes from Formula One, that goes on all the street cars here, ultimately gets into street cars, which is a positive thing. So the messaging, I think, from high-end Formula One and motorsports, that is the transfer of technology into street cars to make it safer for the users to have those cars. So absolutely not. There's never any blaseness of our sport. Jules Bianchi was our last tragic fatality in Suzuka that hit us all hard and still hits us hard to this day. And that was a sequence of absolutely extraordinary events where he tragically lost his life. So did we learn from that? Of course. As we did with Ayrton Senna, as we did with some other tragedies in our sport. But we still want to learn, move forward, race the cars. The drivers love putting their helmets on and racing. But yeah, I heard the tragic news this morning, just heartbreaking with his brother there. Something clearly has gone wrong, and yeah, it was tough to hear that news.
Absolutely, and everybody very much thinking of the Jota family. Thank you very much indeed, both of you. Really appreciate your time. Best of luck for Silverstone. For interviews with the big F1 drivers like Lando Norris and much more,
thank you.
Check out the Sports Agents podcast on Global Player or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you subscribe and follow. Don't forget to rate and review. Mark, Zak, thank you very much for joining us on the Sports Agents. Have a great weekend.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.